If I told you that the name Jesus wasn't originally, just a name, but actually a physical set of directions out of a crushing trap, it completely changes how you read history.
Oh, totally. It shifts the entire perspective.
Right. So today we are taking a deep dive into a massive ancient lexicon. We're looking at a comprehensive lexical study covering all 66 books of the Bible.
Which I know sounds like a lot.
It does. But our mission for you today is to decode the 5 master themes of this theology. We're looking at salvation, redemption, righteousness, holiness, and sonship. And if you're the kind of person who loves to learn, but maybe feels intimidated by dense ancient languages or heavy theological jargon, we're stripping all of that away.
Yeah, we're definitely not just doing a dry vocab lesson here.
Exactly. We're looking for those mind-blowing aha moments hidden inside these ancient words.
Because it is so easy to view ancient lexicons as just like dusty lists of abstract rules, almost like an autopsy of a language where the words are just pinned down under glass.
Right, like a sterile textbook.
Exactly. But the Hebrew of the Old Testament and the Greek of the New Testament, they were living, breathing tongues. They were shaped by gritty history, by the physical realities of the ancient Near East, and, raw poetic vision.
They were used by real people in the streets.
Yes. To truly grasp these 5 master themes, we have to look at the exact words the original authors actually used. We have to enter their thought world and feel the cultural weight those words carried for people in the temples and the marketplaces.
I love that approach, dealing with real people in real historical situations. So let's start with where humanity finds itself in the source material at the very beginning of this story. The texts basically describe a state of being trapped.
Yeah, completely stuck.
And you can't really understand the grand finale of this whole theological framework without understanding that initial rescue. So let's look at our first theme, which is salvation. When we use that word today, people usually think of, a magical spell or maybe a golden ticket to the afterlife. It feels very ethereal.
Right, very abstract. But the original concept was anything but ethereal. In the Hebrew Old Testament, the primary root word translated as salvation is yasha.
Yeah, thanks.
And its core meaning is intensely physical and spatial. It literally translates to, and I love this, spaciousness after constriction.
Spaciousness after constriction.
Yeah.
Wow.
The fundamental image is of someone trapped in a tight, distressing, claustrophobic space. In fact, the Hebrew word for distress literally means narrowness.
Oh, that's fascinating.
So to be saved, yasha, is the physical act of being pulled out of that crushing narrowness and brought into a wide, open, safe space.
That makes total sense when you look at the major narratives they were reading. I mean, the Exodus story is the ultimate example of that, right?
Oh, exactly. The definitive example.
Because the Israelites are literally trapped. The Red Sea is right in front of them. The Egyptian army is closing in behind them, and there are mountains on either side. It is literally the ultimate narrow place.
And then the water parts.
Right. And they are brought through into the spaciousness of freedom on the other side.
And that historical event really burned the spatial concept of Yahja into their cultural consciousness. It became the definitive picture of what God does. He brings people into spaciousness.
Which actually brings me back to the hook we started with. Because the name Jesus in Hebrew and Aramaic is Yahja. And the sources point out that this name comes from that exact same root word.
It does. It translates to Yahweh saves, or literally Yahweh brings into spaciousness.
So every single time the disciples called out to him, just by saying his name, they were basically preaching the core mechanism of the gospel.
The name itself is the mission statement. It's brilliant. And we also see this root woven into their worship practices, like the word Hosanna.
Oh, right. The crowds shouted that during the triumphal entry.
Exactly. Hosanna comes from the imperative form of that same root. It literally means save, we pray, or bring us into the wide space, please. Yeah, it wasn't just a happy song. It was a desperate cry from a people who felt politically and spiritually constricted under Roman occupation. They were literally begging for spaciousness.
That is so powerful. Now, when the narrative shifts to the New Testament, they start writing in Greek. Does the Greek language alter that spatial definition at all?
It does, actually. It adds a completely new dimension. The primary Greek word for salvation is schuzo.
Which is...
And in the broader secular Greek world at that time, sutros was frequently used in medical contexts. It referred to preserving life from a deadly disease or, bringing someone back to physical health.
So it's about healing.
Yes. The writers of the New Testament adopted this word deliberately to show that the rescue isn't just a change of location, it's holistic healing. It's not just moving an invisible soul from point A to point B. It's the restoration of the entire person.
I was actually reading through the source material on this Greek word, and there is a fascinating grammatical breakdown of how the Apostle Paul uses sud, because he doesn't just use it as a single static event.
No, he doesn't. And the grammar here carries profound theological weight.
Right, he uses it in 3 different tenses, which completely shatters how we usually talk about being saved in modern English.
Paul deploys sujos in the past, present, and future tenses. He maps out this massive chronological scope. For example, in his letter to the Ephesians, he uses a perfect passive tense.
And what does that mean, practically?
In Greek grammar, a perfect tense describes a completed action in the past that has permanent, ongoing results. He's essentially stating, you were saved.
So that's the concept of justification. It's a done deal.
Exactly, a finished past event. But then, and this is where it gets interesting, in 1 Corinthians, he shifts to a present passive participle. He describes believers as those who are being saved.
Wait, so the rescue is both a finished event in the past and an ongoing process right now?
Yes, exactly. That present continuous tense points to sanctification. It's the daily, ongoing process of being healed and brought into that wide space over the course of a lifetime.
So you're saved, but you're also currently being saved.
Right. And then finally, in his letter to the Romans, Paul shifts to the future tense. He says, we will be saved.
So that points to the end of the story.
Yes, final glorification, the ultimate completion of the rescue at the end of history. To really understand the biblical concept of salvation, you need all 3. A permanent past event, a continuous present reality, and a guaranteed future completion.
That chronological scope is just massive. Okay, so you're pulled out of the narrow place, and this lifelong healing process begins. But moving someone from captivity to freedom usually involves a mechanism, right? And more importantly, a cost. Which brings us to the second theme, redemption.
Yeah, and redemption might be the costliest word in the entire lexicon.
Let's get into it. In the Greek New Testament, the primary words are litron and exagorazo. And these are, frankly, heavily commercial economic terms.
Very much so. Litron is the literal ransom price paid to free a prisoner of war.
And exagorazo is even more vivid, right?
Right.
It combines the word from marketplace agora with the prefix out of. It specifically pictures slaves standing on an auction block being purchased.
Exactly. You are buying someone out of the agora.
So let's linger on that marketplace imagery for a second, because I think it's really easy for a modern listener to hear buying out of a marketplace and feel like that sounds incredibly cold.
Oh, absolutely.
It sounds like a financial transaction where human beings are just treated as commodities.
It does sound jarring to modern ears, but to feel the weight of it, we really have to look at what ancient debt slavery actually looked like.
Right. It wasn't like what we think of today.
No, not at all. In the ancient world, if a family experienced a famine or a string of bad harvests, there was no bankruptcy protection. You took out loans to buy seed.
And when you couldn't pay?
The creditors took your farm. And when you had nothing left, you sold your own labor and eventually your own family members into servitude just to survive. You belonged to the creditor.
Wow. So you were completely stripped of autonomy.
Completely. Trapped in the agora,
Yeah.
the market. So that prefix out of in exagorazo is crucial. The buyer isn't just purchasing the slave to put them to work on a different farm.
Oh, I see.
They are paying this astronomical debt specifically to lead the person completely out of the market system so they can never be sold again.
Okay, that completely changes the tone of the transaction. It's a rescue, not a business deal. But it still leaves a question. Like, who is doing the buying? A wealthy stranger.
That's where the Hebrew background for redemption comes in. And it introduces a very specific character that makes this even more personal.
Because the Hebrew background kind of eliminates any remaining coldness from that commercial transaction, right?
Exactly. The Old Testament word for redeem is gizal, which introduces the legal concept of the kinsman redeemer.
The kinsman redeemer.
Right. In Israel's ancient kinship laws, if you fell into that horrific cycle of crushing debt and ended up on the auction block, you couldn't just hope a benevolent billionaire was passing through town. The gizal, the redeemer, had to meet 3 non-negotiable conditions.
What were the requirements?
First, the redeemer had to be a near relative, bloodkin. Second, they had to actually possess the wealth required to clear the debt.
Makes sense.
And third, and this is key, they had to be entirely willing to step in and act on your behalf. They couldn't be legally forced to do it.
The story of Boaz in the book of Ruth is the perfect narrative example of this, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The definitive picture.
Because Ruth and Naomi are destitute widows. completely vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And Boaz steps in to buy back the family land and rescue them.
Mm-hmm.
And he does it because he's a relative, he has the resources, and he actively wants to do it. It's deeply relational.
Yes, and his story explains the underlying logic of the Christian doctrine of the Incarnation. God couldn't just shout a pardon from the clouds if he was going to fulfill his own law of the Gazelle.
He had to meet the legal requirements.
Exactly. Christ had to actually become human. He had to take on flesh and become our bloodkin, our literal brother, so that he legally qualified to step up to the auction block.
That is incredible.
According to the theology, he was the only one who was kin, who possessed the infinite value to pay the ransom and who was willing to absorb the cost himself.
That creates such a brilliant cause and effect narrative. You are suffocating in the narrow place. You are standing on the auction block because of a massive debt. Then a willing older brother steps up, pays the ultimate price, and pulls you out of the market into the wide open space.
It's a beautiful picture.
But freedom creates a brand new problem, because you are now standing in front of the judge who just bought you. What is your legal status?
Right. Are you just a pardoned criminal on parole?
Exactly. Are you just waiting to mess up again? Which leads us directly to the concept of righteousness. And I honestly think this is the most misunderstood word in the entire stack of sources.
Without a doubt. If you ask someone in the Western world to define righteousness, they will almost always describe an abstract checklist of moral rules.
Like, did I lie? Did I steal?
Did I follow all the regulations today? Yes. Then I am a righteous person.
Wait, so if righteousness isn't a moral checklist, I'm completely lost. Because in my head, a righteous person is just someone who never breaks the rules. What is the alternative?
Well, we have to look at the Hebrew word, tzedakah. In ancient Near Eastern thought, righteousness is not about a solitary individual passing a cosmic pop quiz. It is fundamentally relational.
Relational. How so?
It means faithfully fulfilling the obligations of the relationships you are embedded in. Imagine an ancient farmer. He is considered righteous if he treats his hired workers fairly, if he provides for his children, if he honors his agreements with his neighbors.
And if he remains faithful to his covenant with God.
Exactly. God himself is considered righteous in the Hebrew Bible because he always acts in perfect accordance with his own character and fiercely keeps his promises to his covenant people. It's about relationship, not just a cold standard.
But the New Testament was written in Greek, and the Greek word takes us straight into a legal setting, doesn't it?
It does. The Greek word dikaio is strictly a forensic courtroom term. It is the specific action a judge takes when buzzing the gavel. It means to declare righteous or to acquit.
Let me push back on how those two concepts merge, though, because it creates a massive logical problem in my mind.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have a guilty person standing in the courtroom. They've broken their relational obligations. They do not have Hebrew tzedakah. The video evidence of their guilt is literally playing on the screen.
Right.
But the judge bangs the gavel and issues the Greek dikaio, an official declaration of complete innocence. If a human judge did that, letting a guilty person walk free despite the evidence, we would demand that judge be disbarred for corruption.
How does the biblical framework resolve the idea of a good judge legally letting a guilty person go?
You've just articulated the central tension of biblical theology. The book of Exodus explicitly states that God will not justify the wicked. Yet in his letter to the Romans, Paul says God does exactly that. He justifies the ungodly.
So how does that work without being corrupt?
The mechanism that resolves this apparent contradiction is the concept of imputed righteousness.
Okay, I need an analogy for imputed because that sounds like heavy seminary jargon. Fair enough. Let's use modern finance. Imagine a subsidiary company that has accumulated massive toxic debt. They are legally bankrupt. Now, imagine a massive parent company with a flawless AAA credit rating acquires them.
Okay, tracking with you.
The judge overseeing the bankruptcy doesn't just pretend the toxic debt doesn't exist. That would be corrupt. Instead, the parent company absorbs the debt entirely and pays it off out of its own vast reserves.
Wow.
And in exchange, the subsidiary legally inherits the AAA credit rating of the parent company.
That is the great exchange Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians.
Exactly.
Christ, the kinsman redeemer who perfectly fulfilled every relational obligation, takes the toxic debt, the guilt. And in exchange, his perfect record, his AAA credit rating is credited or imputed to the believer.
The judge is not ignoring the crime. The penalty was fully paid on the auction block, and the Redeemer's perfect record is legally transferred to the individual. So the declaration of innocence is simultaneously an act of staggering grace and strict legal justice.
That makes perfect sense. So the debt is paid, the legal status is secured. But there's another layer to this new status, which is holiness. And if righteousness is misunderstood, holiness is just flat out intimidating.
Oh, definitely.
We tend to use the word holy to just mean like really, really good, like an extreme version of righteousness.
That is a very common misconception. Holiness is actually the most distinctively theological word in the Old Testament. The Hebrew word is kuder. Ku. The root likely originated from a physical concept meaning bright or luminous. But in biblical usage, it evolved to mean set apart, separate, or simply entirely other.
Entirely other. So it's not just a measure of purity.
There is actually no inherent moral content in the root word itself. It describes the infinite qualitative difference between the Creator and everything He created.
Right, because God isn't holy because He conforms to a really high moral standard.
Exactly. I is the standard because His nature is entirely alien to our broken experience. It is a terrifying, unapproachable otherness.
The famous throne room vision in Isaiah chapter 6 comes to mind.
Yes.
Where the prophet is absolutely terrified because he is seeing this otherness up close.
Yes. The angels in that vision cry out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." And we really have to appreciate the grammar there. Biblical Hebrew didn't have suffix forms like est to create a superlative.
Like biggest or strongest.
Right. If you wanted to say a wall was big, you just said it was big. If it was very big, you said big, big. To repeat a word 3 times was to elevate it to the absolute, infinite, categorical maximum.
Wow.
And this is the only attribute of God in the entire biblical text that is repeated 3 times. He's absolute, maximum otherness.
Which makes what the New Testament does with this word completely wild, because the Greek word for holy is hagios, and the writers take this terrifying, unapproachable divine otherness, and they apply it directly to ordinary, flawed people.
Yes, they do.
The plural form, holy ones or saints, becomes the default title for the church, and calling the church in Corinth holy ones is especially wild to me.
Oh, Corinth is the perfect example.
Because if you read Paul's letters, that church was an absolute dumpster fire of drama, lawsuits, and infighting. It'd be like calling my chaotic fantasy football group chat a gathering of saints.
It is a shocking linguistic innovation. How can a group of people who are practically a mess be labeled with the absolute otherness of God?
Right, has a bad work.
The answer lies in the grammar of the book of Hebrews. The author beautifully resolves the tension between who we are practically and who we are legally. Look at Hebrews chapter 10, verses 10 and 14.
What do the tenses do there?
In verse 10, the author uses a perfect tense verb. We have been sanctified. Remember, perfect tense means a completed past action with a permanent result. It is a finished, unchangeable state.
Because of that imputed AAA credit rating we discussed earlier.
Exactly. You are permanently, perfectly set apart in your legal standing before God. But just 4 verses later, in verse 14, the author switches to a present tense participle, those who are being sanctified.
I love that. In the exact same breath, the text says you are perfectly holy in your permanent standing, but you are very much a work in progress in your daily reality.
Yes. You are already legally set apart, and now you get to spend the rest of your life figuring out how to actually live like the person the judge already declared you to be.
It kind of relieves the paralyzing pressure of perfectionism, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's the balance between positional holiness and practical holiness.
Precisely.
We have covered so much ground here.
Yeah.
We've gone from the claustrophobia of salvation to the slave market of redemption, the courtroom of righteousness, and the terrifying otherness of holiness. But we have to ask the ultimate why.
The big question.
Why design this elaborate cosmic machinery? Why the agonizing ransoms and the complex legal transfers? The sources make it really clear that God wasn't just trying to empty out a cosmic prison or reform a bunch of criminals. He was doing all of this to build a family.
Yes. Everything culminates in the final master theme. Sonship.
Sonship, let's break that down.
Sonship is the destination of the entire theological roadmap. The Hebrew word for son is bon, and it is derived from the root word bnh, which literally means to build.
To build.
Right. In the ancient agricultural world, a son was the one who physically built up the family's continuation, their estate, and their legacy.
But the New Testament uses 2 distinct Greek words to explain how we actually get brought into this family, and the contrast between them is brilliant.
It really is. The Apostle John frequently uses the Greek word tenon. This word focuses heavily on the biological, intimate, organic birth relationship. It emphasizes being literally born of God, sharing his very nature and DNA.
Okay, so that's tenon.
But on the other hand, the Apostle Paul overwhelmingly prefers the word huiothesia, which is a highly specific Roman legal term for adoption.
So tenon is kind of like the DNA test, proving you actually share the family bloodline, while huiothesia is standing in the courtroom watching the judge stamp the official adoption papers.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. And to really grasp Paul's argument, you have to understand how radical Roman adoption law was at the time.
How so?
When a Roman patrician adopted someone, and this was often an adult, actually, to secure the family legacy, 4 profound legal changes occurred immediately.
Okay, what were they?
First, the adopted person received the father's name and identity. Second, they came under the father's absolute protection and authority. Third, and this connects directly back to our earlier themes, any previous debts they had were completely legally obliterated.
Wow, they just ceased to exist in the eyes of Rome.
Entirely. And fourth, they were guaranteed full, irrevocable inheritance rights, completely equal to any biological children the father might have.
Equal to the biological children? So when Paul writes that believers are co-heirs with Christ, he isn't using a loose metaphor at all.
No, not at all.
He means legally, believers inherit the exact same estate that the eternal Son inherits.
The logic is just breathtaking. Because of huiothesia, the adopted child shares the inheritance of the biological child. Christ's inheritance becomes the believer's shared inheritance.
That is staggering to think about. And there's one more word in the sources that ties all of this legal standing back to deep emotional intimacy. It's not Greek and it's not Hebrew. It's the Aramaic word abar.
Abba is perhaps the most intimate word in the entire biblical lexicon. It was the everyday Aramaic term of intense familial affection.
A lot of people think it just means daddy, like baby talk.
Right. Scholars used to think it was just infant baby talk, the equivalent of dada. But it was actually much more profound than that. Adult children used it to address their fathers with a mixture of deep affection and profound respect. Most importantly, it was Jesus's distinctive, personal way of addressing God.
And the context of where we see him use it is absolutely heartbreaking.
It is. We see it most clearly in the Garden of Gethsemane. In the Gospel of Mark, during the moment of his greatest psychological and spiritual anguish, facing the impending torture of the cross, he cries out, "Abba, Father."
Wow.
It is a profound proof that this sonship, this unshakable, intimate relationship, doesn't evaporate when you enter the darkest valleys of human suffering.
And then Paul takes that exact word and applies it to the believer. He says the Holy Spirit enters the adopted child and gives them the ability to cry out with that exact same word, Abba, Father.
Exactly.
The Spirit of the Son actually speaks with the Son's own voice from within us.
We are invited to participate in the Son's own internal, intimate dialogue with the Father. The legal adoption of the courtroom becomes a lived emotional reality in the human heart.
Let's pull the lens back for a second and look at the massive arc of what these words actually build when you string them together. It is a seamless narrative of cause and effect.
It really is.
You start out suffocating in a narrow, crushing place, and you are brought into a wide, spacious freedom. That's Yesha. You are bought completely out of the slave market by a willing older brother who pays the ultimate price. That's Gesha. Because that ransom is paid, you are legally declared innocent by the judge, inheriting a AAA credit rating that isn't your own. That's dikayoch. You are permanently set apart for a special purpose, even while you are a messy work in progress. That's kadosh.
Right.
And every single piece of that cosmic machinery was put into motion so that you could be given the legal rights, the inheritance, and the intense, intimate affection of a child. That's huiothesia and tenon.
When you look at the architecture of it, you realize these aren't just dead words to be memorized for a theology exam. They are the blueprints of a rescue operation. They describe a reality that is meant to fundamentally alter how a person walks through their life.
And for you listening, that is the entire point of this deep dive. These concepts aren't just ancient history. They are meant to define your daily reality. We started by picturing a dusty dictionary, but we found a living narrative. So I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on today, building on everything we've just uncovered.
Let's hear it.
We talked about the Roman law of adoption, huiothesia, and how it legally guaranteed an inheritance. But there is one more detail about Roman adoption law that is absolutely mind-bending.
Oh, this is good.
In the ancient Roman world, a biological child could legally be disowned by their father if they brought shame to the family. But under Roman huiothesia, an adopted child could legally never be disowned.
Never.
The legal bond of adoption was considered more deliberate and therefore more permanent than biology. So when Paul deliberately chose that specific word to describe your place in this cosmic family, he was telling you that your seat at the table is literally unlosable.
Wow.
If the creator of the universe went through the crushing narrowness, the slave markets, and the courtrooms, just to secure a permanent, unlosable relationship with you, how does that kind of permanence change the way you view your own worth today?